Back on the Game Boy Advance, while the Kirby franchise was exploring remakes and the concept of a Metroidvania, another cute platformer mascot entered the scene. Through this time, instead of copying the abilities of enemies and fighting eldritch abominations, it was the legendary Starfy, the Sea Star Prince of Puff Top, as he traverses the ocean helping its inhabitants in any way he can. My history with this series is pretty limited. I never played the DS game, and the rest of the series didn't even release in America, so the most I knew about it for the longest time was from watching reviews on YouTube. I hadn't even considered the series much growing up, that is until, well, I wanted to make a game. For a while, I've gone back and forth on a game concept that I used to consider not too far off from the concept of Starfy, about an octopus as they platform through both sea and land in what I've been calling a surf and turf adventure. While thinking up concepts, I realized when considering a mix of underwater and traditional platforming, that the Starfy franchise might be a good point of reference in understanding what makes a good semi-aquatic platformer. To research the series, I opted to play the original Game Boy Advance trilogy instead of the DS game. Mainly because it was cheaper, but also because I wanted to see how it all began. So I booted up the first game, and I didn't really like it. I could tell it was a well-structured set of games. Not a lot changed throughout the adventure, but I'm not usually one to be bothered by simple platformers with a colorful cast of characters. Yet while playing, I couldn't really bring myself to complete all three games. Stopping halfway through the second one, something was clearly different from my expectations, and I kept looking for something, anything, that connected. It started to feel like a chore, and I preferred to switch gears for a while and figure out a different approach to my game concept that distanced itself from Starfy. But I never really stopped thinking about why I felt like Starfy wasn't really what I was looking for, and recently I realized I should give the series a second chance, this time from a different point of view. Instead of only looking at it for similarities to my own, I should take a step back and really think about what I should gather from it to strengthen my own ideas. So, instead of actually going back and playing the rest of the series with a new perspective, I decided to try and recreate this legendary sea star from memory to reverse engineer his gameplay and figure out why it didn't really click with me when I first played. I was able to recreate the gameplay of another simplistic yet beloved platformer with absolutely no issues whatsoever, so why not give this one a shot? Porting Starfy's moveset into Godot was actually pretty easy, though there's a lot of specific things I had to consider. First of all, Starfy's movement speed. This tends to change a lot depending on where he is and what he's doing. There are a lot of instances where he's forced to slow down. It's a little disappointing to kill off any momentum he had from a running start, but there's a reason for this later, I promise. Starfy typically has two movement speeds, one for walking and one for running. These translate to swimming as well, but I also had to remember to set his movement speed back to walking whenever he did certain actions like attacking and even simply being in the air so he doesn't go flying over platforming sections. Speaking of being in the air, jump height. Unlike Klonoa, I had to put into place a variable jump height. For those unaware, variable jump height really just means if you hold the jump button, you jump higher than if you tap the button. In Starfy's case, releasing the jump button before reaching the maximum height causes Starfy's vertical momentum to stop and slowly reset back to falling. Other games do this, including Starfy's most prominent similarity point, Kirby, but Starfy is a bit unique in the sense that instead of simply stopping vertical momentum, he also floats in place for a little bit. If the player then holds the jump button as soon as he's falling, Starfy will begin to glide down at a set speed. Now for the thing that sparked this whole video and why I even thought about Starfy in the first place, the swimming mechanics. As an aquatic platformer, Starfy takes place mostly underwater, only going above water for more precise platforming. He can move in any direction in this state, and can swim faster if necessary. Acceleration is a bit slower because, well, it's water, but the walking and running speeds remain the same as on land. Starfy also has an additional ability underwater where the player inputs a direction and attacks, launching him in that direction. The mindset of Starfy's swimming and on land modes is really interesting, and the thing that initially caught my eye when I first tried using this series as a reference was how they handled switching between those modes. I was most interested in how they, for a lack of a better term, fluidly transitioned between the smoother control of swimming and the higher precision of platforming. As it turns out, Starfy does have the tools in his swimming mode to recreate this exact feeling I was looking for. By dashing out of the water, Starfy launches himself much higher than he would with a jump, and carry at least some of his horizontal speed for the duration of the launch. This mechanic feels really good to use, and I tried a bunch of ways to practice it in the test level. On the other hand, though, the mechanics for switching from platforming to swimming don't really have the same kind of importance to them. Most of the time, the only thing that Starfy can do is just fall into the water. There isn't some crazy special way to move faster or reach areas that normal swimming couldn't, and the player doesn't really think too much about it. This is obviously not too much of an issue in Starfy, as the focus is mostly on the swimming mechanics and not on the platforming, but it's the start of why it didn't really click with me the first time I played. The next thing to consider when it comes to mixing swimming and platforming is the level design. For the first few rooms of this test level, I recreated some rooms for World 1-3 from the third Starfy game, to the best of my ability, and then the rest were rooms where I could test the exact things I wanted to do that the source material didn't really offer. Something that caught me a little off guard was the fact that these rooms were really cramped together and really small as a result. There's usually a bunch of enemies and objects to interact with, but it makes sense now why Starfy needs to slow down more often, since otherwise the level will be over in a few seconds. It's kinda similar to when I was recreating Klonoa's gameplay loop and designing his hover ability. If you didn't lose momentum at all while hovering, you could just skip over any meaningful platforming. When adding my own level design to the mix, I tried utilizing a similar philosophy, but more so trying to achieve what I was originally looking for with Starfy's mechanics. The rooms ended up being a bit larger than the base game rooms, but they felt accurate enough and they added further evidence on how I felt about the transition between gameplay modes. It felt good to launch out of water, and landing back into water really only served to go back to swimming or prepare another launch. Even with all the enemies, characters, and secrets torn out, I think this setup allowed me to look really closely at how Starfy controls, and really appreciate what Starfy really excels at as a series. When you only look at the controls and level designs, it really isn't much there. The actual focus is on the world of Starfy, all the characters and the problems this little sea star has to help them with. That's probably why I didn't really enjoy it. I was only looking at how it played as opposed to the whole experience. But is there still something there I can pull from the gameplay? Could I still use these mechanics I was looking for as a reference for the game I someday want to make? Well, there's an easy way to test that. This is Blink. They're the intended protagonist of that game concept I was mentioning earlier. In order to get a feel for what it would be like if I used a lot of Starfy's mechanics with this character, I effectively copied the code I made for Starfy onto Blink's sprites and made some adjustments based on what I wanted. Because they also take a lot of inspiration from Sonic the Hedgehog, their movement speed is a lot faster than Starfy's, and acceleration is quite a bit lower to avoid becoming too overpowered with the higher movement speed. Or, at least, it was an attempt to avoid becoming too overpowered. Because the dash attack creates instant momentum, dashing sends Blink absolutely flying in whatever direction the player inputs. This wouldn't really be a problem in larger levels, and horizontally dashing out of water feels even better with the improved mobility. Landing back into the water is still as slow as ever, though. The more I play around with the physics and controls, the more I realize what I'm looking for is a better way to conserve momentum with level design that makes it possible to move really fast. I can definitely make some connections to the basic control scheme of Starfy as inspiration, but I think what I actually want to develop is more in line with a game like Sonic Rush, with mechanics pulled from Starfy, rather than simply being a Starfy-inspired platformer. My favorite level in the Sonic series is Water Palace from Sonic Rush, so if I were to use that game as an inspiration, I know exactly where to look first. All things considered though, I did have a lot of fun, and I think it was good to finally figure out what I was missing when I first played the Starfy games. I was looking at it expecting something to connect to my own ideas, instead of looking at the series for what it is and what it wanted to accomplish for itself. Starfy as a series is an aquatic platformer and way more than just the levels. It's an entire world of characters that I would probably love if I hadn't rushed through looking for something that just wasn't there. This prototype proves just how much is lost when you take that immersive world away and only focus on the controls. I don't think I'll release a build of it like I did for the Klonoa prototype, mainly because there's not a lot to it, and I kind of pulled the sprites directly from the source material instead of making my own. But maybe if I change my mind in the future, I'll put something together to release a playable build. Who knows? And as for that Klonoa prototype, I've been working on elevating it beyond just a basic prototype on the side, so expect to see more of it in the hopefully near future. And, well, that's it. I randomly had the idea to give the Starfy series a second chance and wanted a reason to make another video describing my thought process, so hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, feel free to subscribe and tell me in the comments if there's any more obscure or underrated games you'd want to see me recreate and explore the mechanics of. Maybe you'll find something new in the process.